We are a community of students who want to learn more, taking action and growing together both personally and professionally, whilst having fun and creating memories.
Passionate about social projects that have a long-lasting impact on our community and environment by using the positive power of business.
Looking to constantly seek excellence in order to ensure a brighter career for every member.
These are our goals, our purpose, and our culture.
And this is what unites us as a team and makes us Enactus Sheffield Hallam. My name is Denislav.
I'm Elliot.
I'm Clara.
And I am Irvin.
We're proud of all of our projects, but we want to talk to you today about our most impactful project, STEM for Schools.
STEM for Schools started life in the most unlikely of places. Whilst at a party back in November 2019, Irvin and I were discussing how we felt engaged and challenged by practical tasks, but switched off and disenchanted by theoretical learning. We drew on our own experiences of education and teaching in schools and identified three key things.
Number one, learning by rote disengages and creates an atmosphere of indifference for children that might otherwise have interest in STEM. Number two, teachers did not have access to quality resources to aid them in lesson planning, whilst having increasingly higher pressures put on them to take more responsibility. And number three, despite some interest, very few girls seem to get involved in STEM subjects.
We want to encourage all students to pursue their passions and develop a keen interest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, working closely with schools and producing quality materials to encourage this learning with all pupils. From the very beginning, it was important to us to address the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals of quality education for all, gender equality, and sustainable work and economic growth. We decided to focus on primary schools and intervene at the earliest possible step in children's educational journeys, and to offer an alternative to the typical classroom lesson, which embraces the use of technology to create an interactive learning experience.
We therefore produced a targeting criteria based on maths and science performance.
According to government figures and the Office for Students Polar 4 statistics, of the 150 primary schools in Sheffield, 60 are identified as underperforming in maths and science education. Typically, these schools are underfunded, with recent government budget cuts to schools exceeding £5.4 billion. These cuts reduce the funding for STEM resources, which, accompanied with the lack of maths and science teachers in the UK, means the sciences have suffered in schools. We targeted these schools first and foremost, as STEM for Schools aims to improve the education of all children, regardless of their background.
With this in mind, our initial workshop deliveries have been free of charge, but in the future, we plan to move to a paid offer for schools which can afford these, such as private schools. We will also implement a pay-what-you-can pricing model for schools which cannot afford the asking price of £200 for both deliverables and workshops.
As engineers, in the real world, we like to find practical solutions when there is a problem. From the outset, we decided to create bespoke materials for the schools, tailored to the individual students' needs, getting feedback from staff on exactly what programs of study they need in the classroom and what facilities they have available to do so.
Specifically, we met with Anya at Netherthorpe Primary School, one of our targeted schools with only 50% of students attaining the expected level of maths and science progression. She was very keen to have us deliver a STEM workshop with funding and resources being stretched thin at the school and a real desire to help encourage young children pursue programming. In response, we produced our first workshop, VisuCode, a visual coding interface that teaches children from the ages of 5 to 11 the fundamentals of programming, meeting national curriculum goals to teach concepts such as sequence, iteration, and branching.
Other industry tools have attempted to solve the problem of teaching complicated fundamental principles of computer science in the past. You may have heard of Scratch, a widely used introductory programming language. But despite its popularity, this product has its limitations, as it relies on good literacy skills and on expectations of some knowledge of the discipline, and thus makes it inaccessible to many children and difficult for teachers to communicate the required information.
STEM for Schools is different. We work from the ground up to build a program of study that is entirely visual and designed to be as intuitive as possible. These were created in-house at no additional cost. We wanted our game to be able to be picked up and play without any prior knowledge of programming. and have children leave the experience excited and filled with a solid foundation of knowledge that can be further developed upon as they progress through school. We were careful to design our game around spatial reasoning techniques, as psychological studies have shown this to be the most effective learning method for young girls.
We'd now like to show you some footage of our workshop and explain the structure of how our game works.
We begin our workshop with an activity we call Vote with Your Feet, asking students to move to different ends of the room to assess their understanding of programming concepts. A head count is then taken. We repeat this activity at the end of the workshop to get a quantitative assessment of progression.
We familiarise staff members with the contents of our workshops through our lesson plan documents. Depending on the IT setup of a school, we can go through the workshop on an interactive whiteboard at the front of the room, inviting students to come up and interact, but the workshop works best when each student can interact with the game individually.
We introduce the basic controls of the game, and then the concept of problem solving by splitting up larger problems into smaller ones. And then we encourage students to learn by doing, exploring the game at their own pace, with us acting as assistants if the students get stuck.
The game is focused around guiding a character, Cogbot, to his cogs at the end of each level. Students do this by dragging and dropping directional arrows into a set of instructions for Cogbot to follow, essentially allowing them to program his movements. This is known as sequence in computer science.
It is here that we introduce the more complex programming concepts in a visual and intuitive way. The students learn repetition through the loop command, which makes Cogbot repeat instructions he's already done.
Students then learn branching using the takeoff and land commands, which makes Cogbot skip over instructions. This is known as a jump in computer science. Combining these elements allows students to write algorithms and debug problems, meeting the national curriculum goals for Key Stages 1 and 2. We then got in touch with more primary schools, keen to show them our prototype, and received very enthusiastic responses to our ideas, reaffirming that the areas we had identified as issues in current education are indeed real.
We returned to Netherthorpe Primary Schools to deliver 2 one-hour workshops to 40 children. Following this, we delivered 8 workshops at Totley Primary School, impacting the educational journey of 120 children. In total, this workshop impacted the educational journey of 160 children.
The workshops were a resounding success, with 95% of the students meeting the learning criteria of understanding what an algorithm is and how to break down problems into smaller steps. The teachers gave very positive feedback, stating that they were impressed with the progress made by students in the short time we were with them. Netherthorpe and Totley Primary Schools have expressed interest in booking further workshops. In the future, we want to deliver 20 workshops in local primary schools by the end of April 2021. We measure our outputs based on the number of students impacted and the number of workshops delivered. We also measure the performance of students quantitatively by undertaking the Measure with Your Feet activity, encouraging children to vote on their understanding by moving to one side of the room.
Our desired outcomes are an increased confidence in staff with new technologies, specifically the Raspberry Pi microcomputer, improved aspirations in the pupils to pursue STEM subjects, and a decrease in the frequency of the normal learning by rote lesson structure in school.
Due to recent events, we have had to postpone 8 more workshops, but plan to hopefully reschedule these for the new academic year with a goal to impact the lives of over 200 more students in September 2020. In the meantime, we're supporting schools to set up remote and online learning environments to keep the educational journey of pupils progressing in this unprecedented time.
We've been in talks with Sheffield Hallam University's Engineering Employability Advisor to partner with engineering students and deliver a physics-based workshop to primary school children.
As we stand here in today, looking back at this year, there is hardly anything that we would do differently.
We move fast.
We made some bold decisions.
We were constantly thinking for the long-term success of the team. We are Enactus Sheffield Hallam.